The last thing I remembered was the cold. It wasn't the chill of an air-conditioned arena or the winter wind of a New York premiere. It was a hollow, internal frost that started in my chest and radiated outward until my fingertips went numb. I remember looking up at Rocco, my husband, my manager, the man I thought was my North Star, and seeing something in his eyes that wasn't grief. It was anticipation. "Just sleep, baby," he had whispered, his hand stroking my hair with a terrifying tenderness. "The world will remember you as a legend. I'll make sure of it." Then, the darkness had swallowed me whole. But death, it seemed, was loud. I bolted upright with a gasp that tore at my throat, the sound emerging as a dry, pathetic rasp. My lungs burned as if I'd been underwater for years. I wasn't in a morgue or a hospital. I was in my dressing room at the O2 Arena. The smell of Chanel No. 5, expensive hairspray, and wilting lilies hit me like a physical blow. 10 minutes, Jade. A voice called from behind the door. Makeup needs a touch-up before the final set. I stared at my reflection in the vanity mirror. My skin was pale, my eyes rimmed with exhaustion that went deeper than a tour schedule. My throat felt like I'd swallowed crushed glass. For months, I'd complained about the vocal fatigue, and Rocco had been so supportive, always ready with a specialized blend of herbal supplements and vitamins from his private doctor. "You're back," I whispered to the mirror, my voice barely a shadow. I touched my neck. I was alive. I was back. The door clicked open. I didn't even have to turn around to know it was him. The scent of his expensive oud preceded him, a smell that used to make me feel safe but now made my stomach churn with bile. "Hey, superstar," Rocco said, leaning down to kiss my temple. I flinched, though I tried to mask it as a shiver. He didn't seem to notice. He was too busy looking at his reflection behind mine, adjusting his silk tie. "You look a little peaked. The crowd is screaming for the encore. We need that energy up." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver pill case. He opened it with a practiced flick of his thumb, revealing a single, translucent blue capsule. It looked like a jewel. It looked like a bullet. "Take your vitamin, Jade," he said, his voice smooth as honey. "For your throat. It'll give you that last burst you need to hit the high notes in Starlight." I stared at the pill in his palm. This was it. This was the moment I had died the first time. The overdose that would be blamed on the pressures of fame, the tragic starlet who burned out too bright. "I don't think I want it, Rocco," I said. My voice was a thready whisper, but the defiance in it was a spark in the dark. Rocco's smile didn't fade, but his eyes hardened. "Don't be difficult, honey. We've talked about this. Your vocal cords are strained. This is the only thing that keeps the swelling down. Do it for the fans. Do it for me." He pressed the pill closer to my lips. The silver casing caught the harsh vanity lights, blinding me for a second. I felt the old urge to please him, the ingrained habit of trusting the man who had built my career from the ground up. But then I remembered the cold. I remembered him watching the life leave my eyes with a calculator in his brain. I said no. I croaked, reaching out to push his hand away. Before I could touch him, a shadow loomed in the doorway. Brooks. My head of security was a wall of a man, silent and immovable. He usually stood outside, a phantom sentinel. But today, he stepped into the room, his gaze fixed not on me, but on the small blue capsule in Rocco's hand. "She said she doesn't want it," Brooks said. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in the small room. Rocco spun around, his face reddening. "Get out, Brooks. This is a private matter between a husband and his wife. Go stand by the stage door." Brooks didn't move. He took 2 long strides, and before Rocco could react, he swiped his hand through the air. The pill didn't just fall. Brooks caught it with the reflexes of a predator. "What the hell are you doing?" Rocco shouted, lunging forward. Brooks stepped between us, a mountain of black Kevlar and cold intent. He didn't look at Rocco. He looked back at me, his gray eyes searching mine. "Don't take it, Jade," Brooks said firmly. "I've already sent the last batch to a private lab. I think you already know what they're going to find." The room went deathly quiet. The roar of the stadium outside sounded like a distant ocean. Rocco froze, the mask of the doting husband slipping for just a fraction of a second to reveal the predator beneath. "You're fired," Rocco hissed at Brooks. "Get out of this building before I have you arrested for assault." Brooks didn't flinch. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a sleek, black tablet, tossing it onto my vanity. "I don't work for you, Rocco. My contract is with Jade's estate. And as of 5 minutes ago, I've seen the wire transfers you thought were hidden." I looked at the screen. Line after line of red. Millions of dollars, my sweat, my blood, my voice, funneled into offshore accounts I'd never heard of. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't just a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. The betrayal was real, and it was deeper than I could have imagined. "Jade, baby, listen to me," Rocco said, his voice pitching into a frantic, persuasive tone. "He's lying. He's trying to extort us. He's always been obsessed with you." "Quiet," I said. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a command. I looked at Brooks. "What's in the pill?" "A concentrated neurotoxin," Brooks replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "Small doses to ruin the vocal cords over time. A large dose to stop the heart." I looked back at Rocco, the man I had shared a bed with, the man I had trusted with my life. He looked smaller now. Pathetic. "I have to go on stage," I whispered, the plan forming in the heat of my rage. "Jade, you can't." Brooks stepped forward, concerned. "Oh, I'm going on," I said, standing up and smoothing my gold sequined gown. I looked at my reflection again. The ghost was gone. In her place was something much more dangerous. But the show isn't going to be what he planned. The hallway behind the main stage was a labyrinth of black flight cases, coiled cables, and the frantic energy of 100 stagehands. Usually, I moved through this space like a queen in a procession, shielded by Brooks and flanked by assistants. Now, I felt like a ghost walking through my own funeral preparations. "Jade, stay behind me," Brooks said, his voice a low vibration that barely carried over the muffled roar of the crowd. He kept his hand near his holster, his eyes scanning every shadow. He was the only thing that felt solid in a world that had turned into a house of mirrors. "I need to see them, Brooks," I whispered. My throat was still a raw wound, but the adrenaline was acting like a local anesthetic. "I need to see it for myself." I didn't mean the ledgers or the bank statements. I meant the people I had called my tour family. I led him toward the secondary dressing area, a communal space where the backup dancers prepped. Rocco usually spent a lot of time there, claiming he was managing the choreography logistics. I had been so blind. I had praised him for being a hands-on manager. We reached the heavy soundproof door of the dancers' lounge. It was cracked open just a sliver. I signaled for Brooks to wait. He hesitated, his jaw tight, but he stepped back into the shadows of a stack of amplifiers. I pressed my face to the gap. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of body spray and hairspray. 3 of my lead dancers, girls I had traveled the world with, girls I had bought designer bags for as wrap gifts, were huddled around a vanity. In the center of them sat Rocco. He looked different here. The frantic, sweating man who had just tried to force-feed me a pill in my dressing room was gone. Here, he was the king of the castle. He had his arm around Chloe, my head dancer, his hand sliding familiarly down the small of her back. "Is it done?" Chloe asked, her voice high and breathless. She was already in her gold sequin bodysuit, the one that matched mine. "Is she going to make it through the set?" Rocco laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. It was the laugh of a man who had already won. "She'll make it to the encore. The vitamin I gave her will ensure she has just enough juice to finish Starlight before the collapse. It'll be poetic, Chloe." The tragic pop princess taking her final bow in front of 20,000 people. "And the money?" Another dancer, Elena, asked as she touched up her crimson lipstick. "You're sure the offshore account are locked? If she dies tonight, the labels will be crawling all over the books." "The books are a work of art," Rocco said, leaning back and pulling Chloe onto his lap. She giggled, kissing his neck, the same spot I used to kiss every night before we went to sleep. "By the time the executors wake up, the Jade Foundation will be an empty shell, and we'll be on a private jet to the Maldives. You girls have worked hard. You deserve a piece of the empire. I'm going to miss her clothes, Chloe said with a mock pout. She had such good taste in furs. You can buy 100 furs with the cut I'm giving you, Rocco said. He checked his watch, the diamond-encrusted one I had bought him for our 3rd anniversary. 5 minutes. Let's get out there and give her the send-off she deserves. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. The betrayal wasn't just a financial transaction, it was a sport to them. They were vultures, picking at my bones while I was still breathing. I stumbled back into Brooks's solid chest. He caught me by the elbows, steadying me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew I wasn't. I heard enough, I croaked. The tears were burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. If I cried, the makeup would run, and I needed to look perfect for my execution. They're all in on it. All of them. Not everyone, Brooks said firmly. My team is loyal to the person, not the paycheck. And we have the feed, Jade. I've been recording the audio from this hallway since we left her room. I looked up at him, the silent giant who had watched me be dismantled by a monster for years. Why didn't you tell me sooner, Brooks? Why wait until now? I tried, he said, his voice heavy with a rare touch of emotion. I flagged the expenses a year ago. You told me to mind my business and trust your husband. I couldn't move against him, without proof of the physical harm. I only got the lab results on the vitamins an hour ago. I remembered that day. I had snapped at Brooks in front of the crew, telling him he was just the help and to stay out of my marriage. I felt a wave of shame so cold it eclipsed the anger. I'm sorry, I whispered. Don't be sorry, Brooks said, his eyes narrowing as he looked toward the stage wings where the lights were beginning to swirl. Be loud. It's time for the encore. I straightened my spine, pulling the gold fabric of my dress tight. The tragic starlet was dead, all right. But she wasn't the one who was going to stay buried. Brooks, I said, looking him in the eye. The live stream for the concert, it goes to the global feed for the app, right? 10 million viewers. Yes, he said. Make sure the cameras don't cut away, I said. No matter what happens. I want the world to see exactly who Rocco is. I'll be right there in the wings, Brooks said. The police are already positioned at the stage exits. He's not walking out of here a free man. He's not walking out of here at all, I replied. I turned and began to walk toward the stage, the roar of the crowd growing into a deafening thunder. I could see Rocco standing by the curtain, waiting to give me that final, murderous good luck kiss. I didn't hide my face. I didn't hide the fire. I was a star, and it was time to burn the house down. The walk from the dressing room to the wings of the stage felt like a march to a gallows I had spent years building with my own hands. Every sequin on my dress felt like a weight, every camera lens a judging eye. I could feel Brooks behind me, a silent, predatory shadow. His presence was the only thing keeping my knees from buckling. Rocco was waiting by the heavy velvet curtain. He was holding a bottle of water, his face twisted into that mask of faux concern that had fooled me for a decade. He looked at me, scanning my face for signs of the drug taking hold. You look energized, Rocco said, his voice dipping into that low, intimate tone. He stepped forward, trying to tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear. The pill worked fast, didn't it? You're glowing, Jade. I pulled back just an inch, enough to make it look like a nervous twitch to anyone watching, but I saw the flicker of annoyance in his eyes. I feel different, Rocco, I said. Like I'm seeing everything clearly for the first time. He smiled, a thin, oily expression. That's the spirit. This encore is being beamed to 10 million people live on the Jade Plus app. This is the moment that cements your legacy. Go out there and give them everything. Oh, I'm going to give them everything they paid for, I said. Behind him, Chloe and Elena were stretching, their eyes meeting mine in the mirror of the monitors. They didn't look like friends anymore. They looked like scavengers waiting for a lion to fall. Chloe gave me a small, tight-lipped wave. Kill it out there, Jade, she said. I plan to, I replied, my voice raspy and cold. The stage manager began the countdown. 5, 4, 3. Brooks leaned in close to my ear, his breath warm against my skin. "I'm in the wings, stage left," he whispered. "The second you give the signal, the feed switches to the drive I have. Just stay on your feet." "I'm not going anywhere, Brooks," I said. The music exploded, the heavy, pulsing bass of Starlight, my biggest hit. The hydraulic lift carried me up through the floor of the stage, into a blinding galaxy of white spotlights and pyrotechnics. The roar of 20,000 people hit me like a physical wave, a wall of sound that usually made me feel invincible. Tonight, it felt like a morning cry. I grabbed the gold-plated microphone. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. Every breath was a struggle. I started the first verse, my voice cracking slightly. Usually, I would have panicked, but tonight, the imperfection felt like the only honest thing in the building. I looked down at the front row. They were screaming, crying, reaching out to touch the hem of a girl who was supposed to die tonight. I looked to the side, into the wings. I saw Rocco. He was standing with his arms crossed, talking into his headset, probably checking the stock prices or the transfer status of my money. He looked bored. He was just waiting for the tragic collapse. I turned my back to the audience for the dance break. The girls swirled around me, their movements precise and sharp. Chloe brushed past me, her elbow digging into my ribs a little too hard. "You're lagging," she hissed under the cover of the music. "Keep up, or you'll ruin the shot." "Don't worry about me, Chloe," I said, spinning away from her. "Worry about what happens when the music stops." I walked toward the edge of the runway, the part of the stage that extended deep into the crowd. This wasn't the choreography. I could see the camera operators scrambling to follow me. I could see Rocco in the periphery, uncrossing his arms, leaning forward with a confused scowl. I stopped at the very tip of the runway. The music was building to the final chorus. This was where the vitamin was supposed to stop my heart. I could feel the phantom sensation of it, the way he expected me to gasp, to clutch my chest, to fall beautifully onto the LED floor while the world watched in horror. Instead, I raised my hand. I didn't sing the chorus. I let the backing track play my voice, a perfect, studio-polished lie, while I stood there in silence, staring directly into the main broadcast camera. I saw Brooks move into position near the technical director's booth. "Stop the music," I said into the microphone. It wasn't a shout. It was a rasp, but with the gain turned up, it boomed through the arena like thunder. The band, confused, trailed off into a messy silence. The crowd's roar died down to a confused murmur. "Jade, what are you doing?" Rocco's voice came through my in-ear monitor, frantic and sharp. "Get back to the script. Sing the damn song." I pulled the earpiece out and let it dangle against my neck. I looked into the lens of the camera that was feeding the live stream to millions of homes. "I'd like to talk to you all about legacy," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of terror and triumph. "And I'd like to talk about the man who is trying to kill me." I turned my head toward the wings, where Rocco stood frozen in the spotlight spill. "Come out here, Rocco," I said. "The world is waiting." The silence of 20,000 people is a heavy, physical thing. It pressed against my eardrums, louder than the bass had been. I stood at the edge of the runway, my gold dress shimmering under the spotlights, feeling less like a pop star and more like an avenging angel. In the wings, I saw Rocco hesitate. He was calculating. I could practically see the gears turning in his head. He was weighing the risk of coming out versus the risk of letting me keep talking. The devoted husband persona won. He stepped out from the shadows, his hands raised in a gesture of placating concern, a soft, worried smile plastered on his face. "Jade, honey," Rocco said as he walked toward me, his voice projected through his own lapel mic so the whole arena could hear. "You're exhausted. The tour has been too much. You're having a dizzy spell, sweetheart. Let's get you backstage to the medics." He reached for my arm, his fingers tightening with a hidden, bruising strength as he leaned in close to my ear. "Shut up and sit down," he hissed, his breath hot against my cheek. "I'll tell them it's a nervous breakdown. We can still save the insurance payout." I pulled my arm back with a force that made him stumble. I didn't use the microphone for him. I used it for the world. I'm not dizzy, Rocco, I said, my voice gaining a clarity that surprised me. The rasp was there, but the power was back. And I don't need a medic. I need a locksmith for my bank accounts and a toxicologist for these. I reached into the hidden pocket of my gown, a modification Brooks had helped me make just before the show, and pulled out the silver pill case. I held it high, the translucent blue capsule glinting like a poisonous eye. What is that, Jade? Rocco asked, his voice wavering. He tried to laugh it off, looking toward the audience. She's been taking supplements for her throat, folks. You know how hard she works for you. This isn't a supplement, I said, turning my back on him to face the cameras. This is a neurotoxin. It's been stealing my voice for 6 months. And tonight, it was supposed to take my life. A collective gasp rippled through the arena. I looked toward the tech booth and gave a sharp nod. Suddenly, the giant LED screens behind me, the ones that usually showed slow-motion shots of my face or glittering abstract art, flickered and died. A second later, they roared back to life. But the image wasn't of me. It was a high-resolution scan of a lab report, the words neurotoxic compound detected, flashing in bold red letters. That's a lie, Rocco shouted, his face turning a mottled purple. She's delusional. Security, get her off the stage. None of the security guards moved. They stood like statues, their eyes fixed on Brooks, who is now standing center stage, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked like an ancient god of judgment. The screens, Rocco, I said, pointing behind me. Look at the screens. The lab report faded, replaced by a scrolling list of bank transfers. My name was at the top of every page, but the destination accounts were all linked to a shell company, RV Management Holdings. Millions of dollars. My royalties, my touring income, even my childhood savings. You are skimming me dry, I said, my voice echoing in the rafters. But that wasn't enough, was it? You needed the life insurance too. A dead legend is more profitable than a living wife who's starting to ask questions. The audience began to boo. It started as a low rumble in the back and grew into a roar of pure, unadulterated rage. Rocco looked around wildly. He saw the backup dancers, Chloe and Elena, cowering near the drum riser, realizing the ship was sinking. He looked at the cameras, knowing his face was being broadcast to every corner of the globe. The mask finally shattered. You would be nothing without me, Rocco screamed, dropping the loving husband act entirely. He lunged at me, his face contorted with a hideous, feral rage. I built you. I own you. He didn't get within 3 feet of me. Brooks moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a man of his size. He intercepted Rocco midair, catching him by the throat and slamming him down onto the stage floor with a sickening thud. Don't touch her, Brooks said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. I walked over to where Rocco lay, gasping for air, the man who had been my entire world reduced to a pathetic heap of expensive silk and shattered ego. I looked down at him, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel love. I felt clean. The show is over, Rocco, I said. I looked up at the audience, thousands of lights from their phones twinkling like stars. I didn't need to sing Starlight tonight. I was finally standing in the light of the truth. The blue and red strobe lights of the police cruisers began to bleed into the gold and white of the stage rigging. It was a chaotic symphony of color. For a moment, I just stood there, my chest heaving, watching the man I had loved being pinned to the floor by the man who had actually saved me. Brooks didn't let go of Rocco's collar until the uniformed officers reached the center of the stage. The crowd was a sea of flashing phone screens, digital witnesses to the fall of a mogul. Rocco Vane, you are under arrest for attempted murder, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit fraud, a lead detective said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the arena. He clicked the handcuffs into place with a finality that echoed in my soul. Rocco looked up at me, his hair disheveled, a streak of stage makeup smudged across his cheek like a scar. You think you can survive this, Jade? He spat, his voice trembling with a desperate, ugly spite. Without me, you're just a girl with a ruined throat and a pile of lawsuits. I'll see you in the dirt. I've spent months in the dirt, Rocco, I said, leaning down so only he could hear me. I'm just finally standing up. Brooks stepped in front of me, cutting off Rocco's line of sight as the officers hauled him away. Don't look at him, Jade, Brooks said. He's a ghost now. We need to move. The press is already breaching the barricades. I turned to follow him, but my eyes caught Chloe and Elena near the stage exit. They looked terrified, huddled together like children caught in a storm. Chloe stepped forward, her hands shaking, her eyes brimming with fake tears. Jade, we didn't know. Chloe cried out, reaching for my hand. He pressured us. He told us you were sick and that he was just trying to manage the transition. We didn't know about the poison, I swear. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the gold sequins on her bodysuit, the same ones I was wearing. We looked like twins, but we were worlds apart. You knew enough to talk about my furs while I was still breathing, Chloe, I said, my voice cold and flat. I heard everything in the hallway. Her face went pale, the fake tears drying instantly. Jade, please. Save it for the deposition, I said, turning my back on her for the last time. Brooks led me through the wings and into the service tunnels. The transition was jarring. One moment, I was under the gaze of 20,000 people. The next, I was in the damp, concrete bowels of the arena. But the silence didn't last. By the time we reached the loading dock, the media hurricane had arrived. Dozens of reporters and paparazzi had swarmed the exit, tipped off by the live stream. The flashes were like a barrage of gunfire. Jade, is it true? How much did he steal? Will you ever sing again? Brooks didn't stop. He threw his tactical jacket over my shoulders, shielding me from the lenses. He moved through the crowd like a snowplow, his arm firmly around my waist to keep me upright. Get the car moved up, Brooks shouted into his radio. Now. A black SUV skidded to a halt in front of us. Brooks practically tossed me into the back seat and dived in after me, slamming the door just as a dozen cameras pressed against the glass. As the car pulled away, the adrenaline that had been propping me up finally evaporated. I slumped against the leather seat, my body trembling so violently I could hear my teeth chattering. The room began to spin. The poison, or the stress of it all, was finally catching up. Jade. Brooks's voice was uncharacteristically soft. He reached out, hesitating for a second before placing a hand on my shoulder. You're in shock. Take a deep breath. He really tried to kill me, Brooks, I whispered, the reality finally sinking in. He sat at dinner with me, he kissed me goodnight, and he watched me swallow those pills every single day. He's never going to touch you again, Brooks said. He looked out the back window at the fading lights of the arena. The private lab is waiting for us at the safe house. We're going to get you a full detox and a team of lawyers who aren't on his payroll. I looked at Brooks, the man who had been a shadow in the corner of my life for 5 years. He was covered in the dust of the stage, his knuckles bruised from the scuffle with Rocco. Why did you do it? I asked. You could have just quit. You could have walked away from the drama. Brooks looked at me, his gray eyes steady and unreadable. I don't walk away from my principle, he said. Then, after a pause, he added, and I don't like seeing good things destroyed by small men. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back. I was Jade, the pop star, but the star was currently in total eclipse. I didn't know if I would ever sing again. I didn't know if I had a cent to my name. But as the car sped through the dark streets of London, for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The safe house was a glass and steel fortress tucked into the cliffs of the coast, far from the neon nightmare of London. It smelled of sea salt and expensive cedar, a stark contrast to the sterile, hairspray-clogged air of the tour. For 2 days, I did nothing but sleep and let a private doctor run diagnostics on my blood. The news was a constant hum in the background, Rocco's bail denied, the backup dancers being questioned, the Jade heist trending globally. But inside these walls, it was quiet. I was sitting on the terrace, wrapped in a cashmere blanket that felt too heavy for my tired bones. My throat was finally starting to feel less like a scorched earth. I heard the soft tread of boots on the stone. I didn't have to look up to know it was Brooks. The lab results are fully back, Brooks said, leaning against the railing. He wasn't wearing his tactical vest today, just a charcoal t-shirt that stretched over his shoulders in a way I'd never quite noticed before. The toxins are clearing. Your vocal cords are irritated, but the doctor says the damage isn't permanent. You'll sing again, Jade. I looked out at the churning gray ocean. I don't know if I want to, I whispered. Every time I open my mouth, I'm afraid I'll hear him. Brooks moved closer, his presence a warm weight beside me. He's not in your voice, Jade.
He was just the static.
You're the music. I looked up at him, caught by the uncharacteristic softness in his tone. That's almost poetic, Brooks. Who knew the man who can break a neck in 3 seconds was a closet romantic? A ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It was the first time I'd ever seen him come close to a smirk. I have my moments, he said. Sit with me, I said, patting the lounger next to mine. The security cameras can watch the perimeter for 5 minutes. I think you've earned a break. He hesitated, his professional instincts warring with something else I saw flickering in his eyes. Finally, he sat. He was so much larger than me, his heat radiating across the small gap between us. You're staring, Brooks said, though he didn't turn to look at me. I'm observing, I corrected, feeling a strange, playful spark in my chest, the first bit of jade. That wasn't a brand or a victim. I've spent 5 years looking at the back of your head, Brooks. It's a very nice back, but your face is much more interesting. He finally turned his head, his gray eyes searching mine. You've had a traumatic week, Jade. You're probably just experiencing a surge of misplaced gratitude. Is that what the security manual calls it? I teased, leaning in just a fraction. I could smell his scent, soap, rain, and something spicy, like black pepper. I think I know the difference between thank you and I like the way you look in the moonlight. Brooks cleared his throat, a faint flush creeping up his neck. It was incredibly endearing to see the man who had taken down my husband with one hand be flustered by a little flirting. I'm your head of security, he said, his voice dropping an octave. And I'm a woman who just realized she's been blind to the only loyal man in her life, I said. I reached out, my fingers grazing the bruised knuckles of his hand. You're still hurt from the stage. Let me see. I pulled his hand into my lap. He didn't pull away. I traced the dark purple bruising with my thumb, my heart doing a little flutter that had nothing to do with stage fright. It's nothing, he said, his voice rough. It's not nothing to me, I whispered. I looked up, finding his gaze already on me. The air between us suddenly felt charged, like the moment before the pyrotechnics go off on stage. You saved my life, Brooks. Not just on that stage, but you saw me when I was disappearing. Brooks reached up with his free hand, his thumb catching a stray tear I didn't even know had fallen. His touch was incredibly gentle for someone so strong. I've always seen you, Jade, he said. Even when you weren't looking. I leaned my head against his shoulder, closing my eyes. For the first time in a long time, the shadows didn't feel like they were closing in. They felt like a shield. What happens next? I asked. Tomorrow, the lawyers arrive, Brooks said, his hand lingering near my hair. We start the process of taking back everything he stole. We burn his empire to the ground.
We?
I asked, looking up at him with a grin. If you'll have me, he said. I think I'm going to have a very hard time letting you go, Brooks, I said. He didn't say anything to that, but he didn't move away either. We sat there in the quiet of the safe house, the pop star and the protector, watching the tide come in and wash the old world away. Testing 1, 2, the rain in Spain stays mainly on the plain. I whispered the words into the stillness of the dressing room. My voice was no longer a ghost. It was a gritty, soulful rasp that felt more like me than the sugary pop soprano Rocco had manufactured. It was deeper, scarred, and infinitely more dangerous. Sounds like music to me, Brooks said from the doorway. I turned, and for a second, my heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from the sheer impact of seeing him in a tailored charcoal suit. Gone was the tactical gear and the nondescript hoodies. He looked like a titan. The silk tie was a shade of deep forest green that made his gray eyes look like stormy seas. "Brooks," I breathed, smoothing the front of my white silk jumpsuit. I'd chosen white for the interview. No sequins, no glitter. Just a clean slate. "You look different." "The situation required an upgrade," he said, walking toward me. He stopped just inches away, his presence commanding the space. He reached out, his large hand adjusting the tiny lapel mic clipped to my collar. His fingers brushed against my skin, sending a jolt of electricity straight to my core. "You're shaking," he noted, his voice dropping to that low, private register that only I got to hear. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, looking up at him. "The world is out there, Brooks. Sarah Jenkins has the highest-rated news show in the country. This isn't a concert where I can hide behind a light show. It's just me and the truth." Brooks stepped even closer, his hand moving from the mic to the side of my neck, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. It was a bold move, one that broke every rule in the Bodyguard handbook, and I loved him for it. "You survived a man who tried to erase you from the inside out," Brooks said firmly. "A camera and a journalist? They're nothing. If you get nervous, just look at me. I'll be standing right behind the main lens." "Are you always this good at pep talks?" I teased, leaning into his touch just a little. "Or is this part of the premium security package?" Brooks smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "This part is strictly off the clock, Jade." He leaned down, his forehead resting against mine for a brief, breathless moment. The scent of him was intoxicating, a mix of clean cedar and something uniquely masculine. For a second, I forgot about the millions of people waiting to judge me. I forgot about the legal briefs and the frozen accounts. There was just this man and the heat radiating between us. "You ready, superstar?" he whispered. "Only if you're there," I replied. A producer knocked on the door. 30 seconds, Miss Jade." Brooks squeezed my shoulder and stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place, though the warmth in his eyes remained. He led me out into the studio, where the bright lights felt like an interrogation. Sarah Jenkins was already seated, her expression a mix of professional neutrality and practiced empathy. I sat down, the leather of the chair cool against my skin. I could see the red light on the camera flicker to life. Across the room, I found Brooks. He was standing exactly where he said he'd be, a dark, steady shadow in the periphery of the glare. "We're live in 5, 4, 3. Sarah Jenkins looked directly into the lens. "Tonight, a global exclusive. For the first time since the shocking events at the O2 Arena, the world's biggest pop star, Jade, breaks her silence on the betrayal that nearly cost her life." She turned to me, her eyes sharp. "Jade, let's start with the night of the encore. You told the world your husband was poisoning you. That is a heavy accusation. Do you have the proof?" I took a breath, feeling the air fill my lungs without the constriction of fear.
I didn't look at Sarah.
I looked at the camera, thinking of every woman who had ever been told she was crazy or difficult when she was actually being dismantled. "I don't just have accusations, Sarah," I said, my voice steady and resonant. "I have the blood tests. I have the wire transfers. But more than that, I have my life back." I glanced at Brooks. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Rocco Vane didn't just steal my money," I continued, leaning forward. "He tried to steal my voice because he knew that once I found it, he would be nothing. He wasn't the architect of my career. He was the parasite." The interview lasted an hour. We went through the dancers, the vitamins, and the millions of dollars funneled into offshore accounts. I was raw, I was honest, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't performing. As we went to the final commercial break, Sarah leaned in. "You're very brave, Jade. And your security head, he hasn't taken his eyes off you for a single second." I looked over at Brooks, who was currently whispering into his sleeve mic, his eyes scanning the studio rafters. "He's very thorough," I said, a playful smile playing on my lips. "Is that all he is?" Sarah asked, her journalist's intuition flickering. "He's the man who reminded me that I'm worth saving," I said. When the lights finally dimmed, Brooks was at my side before the floor manager could even unclip my mic. He shielded me from the studio crew, guiding me toward the exit. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with pride. "We did it," I corrected. I reached out and caught his hand, lacing my fingers with his. He didn't pull away. In fact, his grip tightened, firm and protective. "We're not out of the woods yet," Brooks cautioned as we reached the elevator. "The trial starts in a month. He's going to fight dirty." "Let him," I said, stepping into the elevator and pressing the button for the garage. As the doors closed, I turned to him, the confined space suddenly feeling very small and very warm. "I think I've realized something, Brooks." "What's that?" "I'm much better at fighting when I have something to fight for," I said, reaching up to straighten his tie again, my hand lingering on his chest. I could feel his heart thudding against his ribs, fast, just like mine. Brooks looked down at me, his gaze intense. "Jade." "Don't say it's professional, Brooks," I whispered. "Not tonight."
He didn't say it.
Instead, he leaned in and closed the distance, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that tasted like victory and new beginnings. The courthouse felt like a cathedral of consequences. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, floor wax, and the electric tension of 100 reporters packed into the gallery. This was the final stage, the one where the lights were harsh and there were no backing tracks to hide behind. I sat at the prosecution table, my spine a steel rod. I wore a sharp, midnight blue suit. No glitter, no sequins, just the color of a deepening sky. Brooks was positioned directly behind me. I could feel the heat of him, a steady anchor in the sea of legal chaos. Rocco sat across the aisle. He looked smaller than he had on stage, his expensive suit hanging off a frame that seemed to have withered without the constant ego boost of my fame. He kept trying to catch my eye, his expression shifting between a pathetic, pleading pout and a cold, murderous sneer. "You don't have to look at him, Jade," Brooks whispered, leaning down just enough for his breath to tickle my ear. "I want to," I said, my voice low and steady. "I want him to see exactly what he failed to destroy." The defense attorney, a shark in a three-piece suit, stood up for his closing argument. He tried one last, desperate gamble. "Members of the jury," he said, pacing the floor, "what we have here is a classic tale of a starlet who flew too close to the sun. My client, a devoted husband, was merely trying to manage his wife's spiraling addictions and her fragile mental state. These toxins were misunderstood supplements. This theft was a complex management fee for a woman who couldn't even balance her own checkbook." I felt a surge of white-hot rage, but a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. Brooks's touch was grounding, a silent reminder that the truth was already on the record. When it was my turn to take the stand for my victim impact statement, the room went so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock on the back wall. I walked to the box, my heels clicking with a rhythm that felt like a countdown. "Rocco Vane didn't see a person when he looked at me," I said, looking directly at the jury. My voice was raspy, a little broken, but it carried to every corner of the room. "He saw a vault. He saw product. He thought that by silencing my voice, he could own my soul. But a voice isn't just something that comes out of your throat. It's who you are." I turned my head to look at Rocco. He flinched. "You didn't just fail to kill me, Rocco," I said, the words cutting through the air like a blade. "You made sure the whole world finally heard me. And I'm not done talking." The jury was only out for 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up with a piece of paper that weighed more than all my platinum records combined. "On the count of attempted murder, we find the defendant, Rocco Vane, guilty," the foreman said. "On the count of grand larceny, guilty. On the count of conspiracy, guilty." A collective gasp broke out in the room. Rocco slumped forward, his head in his hands, as the judge began to read the sentencing. 20 years. It wasn't just a prison sentence. It was a total erasure of the man who had tried to erase me. As the officers led him away in handcuffs, Rocco turned back one last time. "Jade," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You're nothing without me. You'll be forgotten in a year." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Brooks was at my side before the doors had even closed behind Rocco. He didn't say anything at first. He just wrapped his arm around me and led me out of the courtroom, through the gauntlet of cameras and into the bright, crisp afternoon sun. We reached the SUV parked at the curb. The paparazzi were a frenzy of motion, but Brooks was a wall between me and the world. He opened the door for me, but before I stepped in, I caught the lapel of his jacket. "Brooks," I said, pulling him slightly closer. "Yes, Jade?" he asked, his gray eyes softening as they searched mine. "The trial is over.
The lawyers are gone.
And for the first time in my life, I don't have a schedule," I said, a slow, flirty smile spreading across my face. What does a girl have to do to get her head of security to take her somewhere with no cameras and a very long wine list? Brooks chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that made my heart do a victory lap. He leaned in, his lips brushing against my temple. "I think the security protocol for this specific afternoon involves a private beach and a complete lack of he said/she said drama."
"Sounds perfect," I said.
He helped me into the car and slid in beside me. As the driver pulled away from the courthouse, I looked out the window at the city. I was Jade. I was a survivor. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for the encore. I was just beginning the first act of the rest of my life. I reached over and took Brooks's hand, lacing my fingers with his. He squeezed back, his grip firm and certain. "So," Brooks said, his voice playful, "now that you're a free woman, what's the first thing you want to do?" I leaned my head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of cedar and the sweet, clean air of freedom. "I want to see if I can still hit the high notes," I whispered. "But this time, I'm only singing for you." "I'd like that," he said. And as the car sped toward the horizon, I realized that the best music I'd ever make wasn't going to be on a stage. It was going to be right here, in the quiet, with the man who had stayed in the shadows until it was time to lead me into the light.